Welcome back to Pietros Maneos Finance. In today's video, what I wanted to discuss is the connection between the Great Resignation of 2021 and the FIRE movement. The idea for this video actually came to me last night before I fell asleep, and I was just thinking about this idea of the Great Resignation and the psychology behind it. So for those of you who aren't aware of what it is, here's on Google News, just if you type it in, Great Resignation 2021, Forbes is giving advice to employers. What happens when all of your coworkers quit? The Great Resignation, how employers drove workers to quit. The Great Resignation is really the Great Discontent. So different articles on it, but basically it's a lot of people are quitting their jobs. And, you'll see these stories of an entire Burger King will say, sorry, we've all quit, or if you're working even a corporate job, a lot of people within those corporations are resigning. And I think it comes down to a couple different things. The first, those that are more cynical and maybe more against it would say things like, oh, everyone's living on government benefits. People are making more now from the government than they were actually employed. And that's probably a part of it, of course. And I think the other thing is that when a lot of people were home during COVID, they weren't living that sort of busy, go, life, that 40, 60, 80-hour work week. They were home. Maybe they were spending more time with their significant other, their children. For some people, maybe that drove them crazy, right? But for others, they started to say, wow, like I really like having that second cup of coffee. I really like, driving my child to school. I really like owning my own time. Perhaps if they lived in the suburbs or in the countryside, they built a garden, which they never could have had the time to care for before. Perhaps they were reading books that they wanted to read for years and just never had the time. One of my quotations is capital is perhaps the last form of freedom. That's one I think that applies to this. And then the second one is there is no greater luxury than owning your own time. And I think here, people started to own their own time. Now, again, you could argue that they were getting government checks to do so. You could argue that, you could argue against it. But I think that was the genesis, the basis, is that people were free, essentially. And so that's led to a lot of them, I think, psychologically saying, wow, how do I structure my life like this? How do I not go back to a life that I really don't like, that I've probably maybe settled for? So that's really interesting to me, because on my channel, it's about finance, investing. So for me, it's just fascinating that there's a lot more people out there that are interested in beating the system, so to speak. And, the FIRE movement's the same way. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the FIRE movement, it's basically people, I think it's a financially independent, retire early. People like Susie Orman have come out against it. A lot of people hate it. But the idea with the FIRE movement is, let's say you have a couple, and let's say they each make $50,000 a year, okay? They say, you know what, we're 24. We want to retire at 35, 40, or 45. How do we do that? So we sort of consign or resign ourselves to our present jobs, but we overinvest. So if you meet it with a financial advisor, a lot of times they'll say like, oh, invest 5%, 10%, 15%. These are people that are investing maybe 30, 40, 50%. They're living very abstemious lifestyles. They're not going out to dinner. They might walk or take public transportation to work. They might cut their own hair. They're savers, and they're ultra frugal, not for the sake of frugality, but when you understand compound interest, you understand investing. They understand if you invest in low cost index funds, let's just say that couple, it's 50 and 50. And let's say they're investing anywhere from 30 to 50,000 a year. Well, after 10 years, you've invested 300,000 if you're doing 30,000, or 500,000 if you're doing 50 a year. So you have somewhere between 3 to 500. But the way investing works is that 300 might be 500, that 500 might be 700 or 800. So all of a sudden they say, well, with 700,000, I can maybe work 20 hours a week, or I can check out totally. And there's a lot of different types of FIRE movements. So that's not the purpose of this video. If you're really interested, you can get in like lean FIRE, fat FIRE. I'll just pull this up. Mr. Money Mustache, I think, is one of the progenitors of this movement. And this is his webpage here. So if you're interested in that, you can kind of just scroll down. And this is about, I guess, what people are getting wrong about FIRE. But yeah, just you can kind of do a Google search and come up with more information on FIRE. But yeah, so it's essentially people saying it's not the Great Resignation, which people quitting their jobs right now. It's okay, I'm going to suffer through this or endure this, or whatever description you want to use there. I'm going to do another 5 years here, another 8 years. And they almost sometimes maybe view it as a jail sentence. Maybe they have a government job or a corporate job that they're not enthralled with, but it's, 75,000, 100,000, whatever it may be. And they're just going to stick it out for X amount of years until they can retire in their mid 30s, 40s, 45. I mean, I basically checked out at around 36 myself. I'm 41 now. When I say checked out, I wouldn't say it's like, checking out completely. It means like I'm managing my investments. I'm looking for new investments. I'm basically looking to multiply my money over and over and over. But I would say this: the Great Resignation and the FIRE movement are a rejection of the idea of a job, essentially. The idea of having a job for 20, 30 years. And in fact, it's a rejection of this sentiment here. I actually have pulled it up. This is from my my January letter. And I contrast in this letter Joe Biden's view of jobs with Robert Kiyosaki, who Robert, I consider myself essentially a disciple of Kiyosaki. Not only did he teach me the real estate game, but he's one of the few people who's like kind of anti-job. And it's, look, if you need a job, get a job. But meaning the idea is, how do you create wealth? How do you, getting a job is for losers, the title of his video. But Biden, people in the Great Resignation and people in the FIRE movement are rejecting this sensibility of the great American work ethic, or the great, people call it the Protestant work ethic. But listen right here, and this is Joe Biden's view on jobs, which contradicts what I'm talking about, what other people are pursuing. And again, this is a non-political statement. So whether you think like Joe Biden is the best president, that's cool. If you think Joe Biden is the worst president, that's cool. This isn't political. This is just the idea of jobs.
And then he'd say, Joey, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. I've never forgotten those lessons. That's why my economic plan is all about job.
So there you go. So Joe Biden there talking about jobs. A job is more than a paycheck. It's about dignity. It's about other things than just that capital. You kind of, it's almost your patriotic duty to hold a job. I've always held Kiyosaki's view, which is, how do I get out of having a job? How do I beat the system? And I've always felt, for those of you who have read my Seeking Alpha essays or do follow along here, I've always felt you can kind of beat the system one of two ways. And the first is kind of the Henry David Thoreau, Walden's Pond, Homestead, checking out to nature, get your solar panels, get your vegetable garden, you're self-sufficient, you're sustainable, and you basically are living off the land as opposed to needing a paycheck to pay for your lifestyle. That's very difficult. A lot of people that try that, you can go on YouTube, you can go elsewhere and just read about it. Trying to homestead without any capital other than having purchased the land, perhaps, is a difficult pursuit. And, even one of my heroes, Monty Don, the great English gardener, has discussed also, I think, just how difficult that is to live without a job on a homestead. And then, so, you try to peddle vegetables at farmers markets, or, you're just trying to look for a source of income from that particular property to survive. It can be difficult. The pursuit is noble, but the execution is difficult. But yet there are people who have done it. There are people who have homesteaded and say it was, maybe it was the best thing I've ever done in my life. It reminds me also of a lot of like the 1960s, a lot of the hippies from the 1960s, the Back to the Land movement. A lot of them went to upstate New York. I think Woodstock is in upstate New York, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of them went to upstate New York, Northern California, Oregon, Washington. They kind of checked out to the countryside. I actually have this pulled up. Timothy Leary, for those of you who don't know, he was like a big counterculture, a hero of the time. This is in 1966, 1967. He spoke to about 30,000 hippies. Turn on, tune in, drop out. So that also had kind of a drug culture to it, a marijuana culture to it. I don't think that either the Great Resignation or the FIRE movement is as like marijuana focused or drug focused as were the hippies from the 60s, the sort of Timothy Leary types. And so that's the one, is you can kind of do the homestead thing, the Timothy Leary thing, right? The other way is the opposite. I think the other way to beat the system is playing the role of Carl Icahn, meaning you can beat capitalism by being an archcapitalist. A lot of times people will term it FU money, right? So you can beat the system by having so much money that you're independent of others, you're independent of society. So, I mentioned Joe Biden earlier, like, if you have $8 million or $12 million, like the Democrats, the Republicans, like this party, that party, like you're above party. You're almost above nation state. You're above citizenship to a certain extent. Now, people can argue with that and say that, you're not. No, you're not. Like you're the same as everyone else. And this kind of gets into a whole nother idea of the sovereign man, of people like Andrew Henderson, nomad capitalist, of people looking at nation states as others look at restaurants. Like, I like this one because it's offering me this, and then they changed. I'm gonna go over here now. In this country, the different political they changed. I'm gonna go over here now. So that idea of a nomad capitalist. So that's a whole kind of different topic. But my larger point is, instead of like checking out to the homestead, you can either hold a job, have a business that's successful, learn how to invest, but basically spend your time cultivating and pursuing individual wealth so that you basically can beat the system that way, So you have the homesteader and you have the arch capitalist. And what's interesting to me, and I've said this to people, is they probably hate each other, right? Like the Wall Street Titan or the Wall Street investor, would like turn his nose down like a lazy, country bumpkin, doesn't work, doesn't do anything. And then someone who's like hyper focused on money, then someone that is maybe in the countryside and in that mentality would look like, this rich capitalist, like who does he think he is? You see all this like hate against Elon Musk and hate against Jeff Bezos and hate against the rich. The term that I use, and I borrowed it from Harold Bloom, is resentniks. So a lot of them are resentniks. And so, but at the end of the day, I think they're both pursuing the same aim, which is freedom and independence. And so that's just like, my thoughts on that, the Great Resignation, FIRE movement, those two present day movements. It'll be interesting to see, again, when the world gets back to work, like what happens to the Great Resignation. Are these people when they're not getting let's say unemployment or whatever benefit from the government, and they maybe do have to go to work or what have you, how that plays out moving forward in the next few years. So that's pretty much it for today. Don't think I forgot anything. Yeah, we went through pretty much everything I wanted to go over. Appreciate all the likes, subscribe. So subscribe, really appreciate that. I think I'm around 175 to 180, somewhere in there. Been really enjoying this video. I appreciate all the views. Been getting a lot of views recently too. So, and then also any comments on this, if you think, if you think, oh, like, well, who do you think you are to even think that way? Or you think like, oh, that's a beautiful aim, or you think, differently or the same, feel free to comment. Really appreciate that. And take care. Ciao.